The Guardian's Choice. The alarms on the EDF Hyperion screamed as Captain Rhiannon Vale raced through the burning corridor. Smoke filled her lungs despite the environmental suit's filters, and the deck plates groaned beneath her boots. The Stellari research vessel was breaking apart around them, its highly advanced but delicate architecture unable to withstand the pirate attack that had brought it to the edge of human space. "Command, this is Vale," she transmitted, ducking under a fallen beam. "Target located. One survivor in the secondary lab. Prepping for emergency evac." "Negative, Captain," came the reply, crackling with interference. "You have new orders. The Stellari vessel contains classified technology. Set the charges and withdraw immediately." Rhiannon paused at the laboratory door, her hand hovering over the emergency release. Through the reinforced viewport, she could see the lone survivor, a young Stellari researcher trapped behind a containment field. The alien's luminescent skin pulsed with fear, casting rippling patterns of light across the smoke-filled chamber. "There's someone still alive in here, Command." "Your orders are clear, Captain. The Stellari's evolutionary abilities make them too dangerous if captured by hostile forces. This is a sanitization mission now." Rhiannon's jaw clenched. The Stellari were known for their advanced bioengineering and their ability to adapt their own genetic code, abilities that made them both fascinating allies and dangerous potential enemies. But the figure behind the glass wasn't a threat. She was a scientist, probably no older than 20 in human terms, and she was terrified. "With respect, Command, I'm invoking Article 7 of the Emergency Response Protocol. The preservation of life takes precedence. Captain Vale, stand down. That's a direct order." Rhiannon switched off her comm and began bypassing the door's security. The young Stellari watched her with wide, iridescent eyes that shifted color like oil on water. When the door finally slid open, Rhiannon moved quickly to the containment controls. "I'm going to get you out of here," she said, knowing the Stellari could understand English even if they rarely spoke it. "But we have about 3 minutes before this whole section depressurizes." The containment field flickered and died. The Stellari scientist stumbled forward, her crystalline voice barely a whisper. "The data, my research, it must be preserved." "No time," Rhiannon said, taking her arm, "unless you want both of us to die here." The deck shuddered violently, and warning lights bathed the lab in crimson. They ran together through the disintegrating corridor, the Stellari researcher struggling to keep pace in the heavier gravity. Behind them, something exploded, and Rhiannon felt the heat even through her suit. They reached the emergency airlock just as the hull began to buckle. Rhiannon sealed them inside and activated her suit's rescue protocols, extending its atmospheric shield around them both. The Stellari pressed close against her as the airlock cycled. "My name is Lyra," the scientist said suddenly, her voice carrying that distinctive crystalline resonance. "I want you to know who you saved." Before Rhiannon could respond, the outer doors opened to space. The rescue pod was waiting, but so was the EDF Hyperion, its weapons systems locked on their position. Rhiannon knew in that moment that her career was over. She disobeyed a direct order, compromised a classified operation, and was about to steal an emergency pod with an unauthorized passenger. She did it anyway. The pod's engines fired, carrying them away from the dying research vessel. On the Hyperion's bridge, Admiral Chen would be furious, probably already drafting the court-martial papers. But as Rhiannon watched Lyra curl into herself, the Stellari's bioluminescent patterns slowly stabilizing from panic into something calmer, she knew she'd made the right choice. "I don't understand," Lyra said after a long moment. "Your people ordered you to let me die. Why didn't you?" Rhiannon checked their trajectory, plotting a course that would take them to the nearest neutral station. "Because some orders shouldn't be followed, and because no one deserves to die alone in the dark." The Stellari was quiet for a long moment, her skin shifting through patterns that Rhiannon couldn't interpret. Finally, she spoke again, her voice carrying an emotion that transcended species. I will remember this, Captain Vale. No matter how long it takes, I will find a way to repay this debt. Rhiannon smiled slightly, already imagining the chaos waiting for them at the station. Just try to stay alive, Lyra. That'll be payment enough. She didn't know then how those words would echo across the years, or how that simple act of defiance would change not just her life, but the future of two species. As their tiny pod carried them through the star-scattered void, Rhiannon Vale had no way of knowing that her greatest challenge still lay ahead, or that it would begin, as so many things do, with an unexpected return. Echoes across stars. 8 years could change a lot of things, but the bitter chill of deep space remained constant. Rhiannon Vale watched her breath fog in the cockpit of the Starcross, a retrofitted cargo hauler that had become both her home and livelihood since leaving the Earth Defense Force. The ship's aging heaters struggled against the cold of the void, just like everything else on this patchwork vessel struggled to keep running. The outer rim trading route between Nueva Geneva and the Prosperity colonies wasn't glamorous work, but it kept her moving, kept her free. More importantly, it kept her away from Earth's increasingly complicated politics regarding the stellary. These days, she preferred the company of her cargo and the distant stars. Proximity alert, the ship's AI announced, its voice crackling through worn speakers. Unknown vessel approaching on Vector 7-3 Mark IV. Rhiannon straightened in her pilot's chair, checking the scanner displays. Out here, unknown vessels usually meant pirates or worse, but the signature materializing on her screens didn't match any known raider configurations. In fact, it didn't match any human designs at all. Classification, she asked, already reaching for the controls. Stellary diplomatic vessel, Luminous class. They're broadcasting an emergency signal. Rhiannon's hands froze above the navigation panel. In 8 years, she carefully avoided any contact with the Stellari, despite the occasional news about their growing presence in human space. The memories of that rescue mission, of Lyra's frightened eyes, and the career she'd sacrificed, had faded to a dull ache she'd learned to live with. Captain, the AI interrupted her thoughts. They're requesting emergency docking. Their primary drive system is failing. The rational choice would be to send them coordinates for the nearest outpost. The Outer Rim had plenty of stations better equipped to handle diplomatic vessels. But something in the emergency signals pattern caught her attention, a subtle variation that couldn't be coincidence. It was the same pattern she'd used to bypass the laboratory security systems 8 years ago. "Begin docking procedures," she ordered, her voice steady despite the sudden pounding of her heart. "And run a full scan for any pursuit vessels." The Stellari ship was smaller than she remembered their vessels being, barely larger than her cargo hauler. It maneuvered with obvious difficulty, its usually graceful lines marred by what looked like damage from a recent meteoroid storm. As the docking ports aligned, Rhiannon checked her sidearm more out of habit than any real concern. The airlock cycled, pressures equalizing with a hiss. When the inner doors finally opened, Rhiannon found herself face to face with the ghost. Lyra stood in the doorway, her bioluminescent patterns more complex than Rhiannon remembered, speaking of age and experience. But her eyes still held that same fierce intelligence, now tempered with something that looked like desperation. "Hello, Captain Vale," Lyra said, her crystalline voice carrying both warmth and urgency. "I apologize for the deception, but I needed to be certain it was really you." 8 years, Rhiannon replied, holstering her weapon. "And you show up in damaged ship playing dead in the engines. You could have just sent a message." "Messages can be traced, and I couldn't risk anyone knowing I was looking for you." Lyra stepped fully into the airlock, her skin shifting through patterns that Rhiannon had learned long ago indicated stress. "I need your help again, Captain. But this time, the stakes are far higher than just my life." Before Rhiannon could respond, another figure appeared in the doorway behind Lyra. A child, no more than 7 years old, with skin that shimmered like starlight. But where Lyra's bioluminescence followed the traditional patterns of her species, The child's light moved in chaotic, beautiful swirls that seemed to defy the very laws of stellar biology. "This is Nova," Lyra said softly, resting a hand on the child's shoulder. "My daughter. And she's the reason the stellar conclave wants us both dead." Rhiannon stared at the child, noting the subtle but unmistakable variations in her features, patterns that shouldn't exist in any pure stellary. Understanding dawned slowly, followed by a cold wave of realization. "The genetic modifications," she said. "Your research. The ones they were willing to destroy an entire ship to keep secret." Lyra nodded. "I was dying, Captain. The attack damaged more than just the ship. The only way to survive was to adapt, to change my own genetic code in ways my people had forbidden. I didn't know then what it would mean, what it would lead to." She looked down at her daughter with a mixture of love and fear. "Nova is something new, the first of her kind, and her existence threatens everything the Conclave believes about genetic purity." Nova looked up at Rhiannon, with eyes that swirled with colors no stellary had ever displayed, a living testament to both the miracle and danger of her existence. "Mother says you save people," she said in a voice that chimed like crystal wind chimes, "even when you're not supposed to." Rhiannon felt the weight of the past 8 years, of choices made and paths not taken, settle around her shoulders. She'd left that life behind, sworn off playing hero. But looking at Nova, seeing the hope and fear in both their faces, she knew her decision had already been made. "Your ship's not actually damaged, is it?" she asked, already knowing the answer. A small smile crossed Lyra's face. "The engines are fine, but we needed a reason that wouldn't raise suspicion when we docked." "Smart." Rhiannon turned, heading for the Starcross's bridge. "Come on. If we're going to outrun the Conclave, we need to plot a course that keeps us away from any official shipping lanes." "You're going to help us?" Lyra asked, following with Nova close behind. "Just like that." Rhiannon began inputting coordinates, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency. 8 years ago, I made a choice to save a life when orders said I shouldn't. I've never regretted it." She looked back at them, at the mother and daughter who represented both miracle and revolution. "Besides, someone once promised to repay a debt. Looks like it's time to collect." As the Starcross's engines hummed to life, Rhiannon Vale prepared to once again defy the odds and protect those society had deemed too dangerous to exist. But this time, she wasn't just saving a life. She was protecting the future itself. Bonds of light. The Starcross drifted in the shadow of a massive gas giant, its systems running silent as Rhiannon watched Nova demonstrate her abilities. The child sat cross-legged in the cargo hold, her bioluminescent patterns creating impossible shapes in the air around her, three-dimensional structures of light that seemed to defy the fundamental laws of stellar biology. "She's manipulating photonic energy at the quantum level," Lyra explained, her voice mixing pride and concern. "No stellary has ever shown this level of control over their bioluminescence. The patterns she creates, they're not just light. They're information. Complex data structures that she can perceive and manipulate instinctively." Rhiannon watched as Nova constructed a perfect model of their solar system from light, complete with orbital patterns and gravitational influences. "Your people think this makes her dangerous. The Conclave believes in controlled evolution. Every genetic modification, every adaptation must be carefully planned and approved." Lyra's patterns shifted to show frustration. "What I did to survive, adapting my own genetic code in that moment of crisis, it went against everything they believed in. And Nova, she represents something they never planned for, something they can't control." Nova looked up from her light constructs, her eyes swirling with colors that seemed to pull at the edges of visible spectrum. "I can see the songs in the stars," she said matter-of-factly. "The old patterns and the new ones waiting to be born." A warning chime from the bridge interrupted them. Rhiannon moved quickly to check the sensors, Lyra close behind. 3 ships had emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system, sleek stellary vessels that moved with predatory grace. Conclave's security forces, Lyra whispered, her patterns pulsing with fear. They're earlier than I expected. How did they find us so quickly? They probably tracked our quantum wake. Nova's presence. It creates distinctive patterns in subspace. We've been trying to mask them, but they're broadcasting. Rhiannon interrupted, activating the comm system. A stern voice filled the bridge, speaking perfect English. Attention unregistered vessel. This is Executor Theron of the Stellary Conclave. You are harboring fugitives in violation of Genetic Preservation Act. Power down your systems and prepare for boarding. Rhiannon's fingers flew over the controls, plotting emergency trajectories. Any chance they're here for peaceful negotiations. The Executor leads the Conclave's purification efforts, Lyra said, her voice tight. He's the one who ordered my research destroyed 8 years ago. He won't stop until he has Nova. Captain Vale, the Executor's voice came again. Our records show you were once a respected officer of the Earth Defense Force. Surrender the genetic aberrations, and we can arrange for your reinstatement. Your career, your life. Everything you lost can be restored. Rhiannon looked at Lyra, then through the cargo hold viewport where Nova still sat surrounded by her impossible lights. You know what's funny? She said, her hand hovering over the engine controls. 8 years ago, I thought I lost everything. Turns out I just found something better to fight for. She killed the comm and fired the engines at full burn. The Starcross leaped forward, diving between the gas giants' swirling storms. The Stellary ships pursued, their superior technology allowing them to close the distance rapidly. They're going to catch us, Lyra said, gripping the console as the ship shuddered under emergency maneuvers. No, they won't. Rhiannon guided them deeper into the gas giant's atmosphere, where pressure and magnetic fields played havoc with sensors. Because they're not the only ones who've evolved. The Starcross wasn't the pristine cargo hauler it appeared to be. 8 years of running independent missions had taught Rhiannon the value of hidden advantages. She activated systems that didn't appear in any registry, experimental stealth technology she'd acquired from less reputable sources. But as they dove deeper into the roiling storms, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. The pressure was building beyond safe levels, threatening to crush their hull. Mom. Nova's voice came from the cargo hold, still perfectly calm. I can help. I can see the way through. Lyra and Rhiannon exchanged glances. In the hold, Nova's bioluminescent patterns had changed, becoming more complex than anything either of them had seen before. The light structures around her weren't just models now. They were matching the real-time flow patterns of the gas giant's storms. Let her help, Lyra said softly. She understands things we can't even perceive. Rhiannon nodded and switched the navigation display to the cargo hold. Nova approached it, her small hands moving through her light constructs with absolute precision. As she guided them, the Starcross threaded through the storms like a needle through fabric, finding paths that shouldn't have existed. Behind them, the Stellary ships struggled against the turbulence, their advanced technology suddenly a liability in the face of Nova's intuitive understanding of the chaos. One by one, they pulled back, unable to match their trajectory. When they finally emerged from the gas giant's atmosphere, they were alone. Nova's light constructs faded, and she swayed slightly with exhaustion. Lyra moved quickly to support her daughter, holding her close as her patterns showed a complex mix of worry and pride. That was amazing, Rhiannon said, setting course for their next hiding spot. But they'll be back. The Executor doesn't seem like the type to give up easily. No, Lyra agreed, stroking Nova's hair as the child drifted to sleep. But we've bought time. And maybe, she looked at Rhiannon with an expression that transcended species, maybe we've also found someone worth trusting with the truth. What truth? About why the Conclave really fears her. It's not just about genetic purity or controlled evolution. Lyra's patterns shifted to something Rhiannon had never seen before. Nova isn't just different, Captain. She's the first step toward something greater than either of our species. And there are those in the conclave who would rather see both our races extinct than allow that future to unfold. As the Starcross carried them deeper into space, Rhiannon Vale realized she wasn't just protecting a mother and child anymore. She was guarding the frontier of evolution itself, a future that would either unite two species or tear them both apart. Storm rising. The refugee station sanctuary floated at the edge of contested space, a sprawling collection of interconnected habitats that had become home to those who existed between worlds. Rhiannon guided the Starcross through the docking protocols, noting how the station's population had grown since her last visit. Humans mingled with a dozen alien species, including a few Stellari who had chosen exile over their society's rigid controls. "We'll be safe here for a while," she told Lyra as they secured the ship. "The station's automated defenses are top tier, and the administrator owes me a favor." "The Conclave has agents everywhere," Lyra replied, helping Nova adjust the hooded cloak that hid her distinctive bioluminescence. "And after what happened in the gas giant, Executor Theron will be more determined than ever." They made their way through crowded corridors, passing merchants hawking goods from 100 worlds. Nova stayed close between them, her eyes wide beneath the hood, as she took in the vibrant chaos of station life. Rhiannon led them to a quiet section of the residential ring, where the curved walls were decorated with artworks from various species. The station's administrator, Director Jin, was waiting for them in a private conference room. She was a tall woman with cybernetic augmentations visible along her temples, and she greeted Rhiannon with a knowing smile. "When I heard you were approaching, I assumed you'd gotten into trouble again," Jin said, gesturing for them to sit. "I didn't expect you to bring a galactic crisis to my doorstep." Rhiannon tensed. "How much do you know?" "Enough." Jin's augmented eyes focused on Nova with obvious fascination. "The Conclave has been broadcasting warnings about dangerous genetic fugitives. They're offering significant rewards for information. And..." Rhiannon's hand drifted toward her sidearm. "And I told them to go to hell." Jin smiled. "Sanctuary exists to protect those who need it, regardless of species or circumstances. Besides, I've never trusted the Conclave's definition of dangerous." Nova suddenly stepped forward, her cloak shifting to reveal swirls of light that matched the patterns in Jin's cybernetic implants. "You're like me," she said softly. "Change. Different, but not wrong." Jin's augmentations flickered in response, creating a brief dialogue of light. "Smart kid. Yes, I've made my own modifications. That's why I built this place, for everyone who chooses to evolve on their own terms." The moment was interrupted by urgent chimes from multiple comm systems. Jin's expression darkened as she checked the incoming data. "We have problems. Multiple Conclave ships just emerged from FTL, including a Judgment-class carrier. They're demanding we surrender you immediately." Lyra's patterns shifted to show alarm. "A Judgment carrier? They're only used for major military actions." "Executor Theron isn't taking chances anymore," Rhiannon said, already planning escape routes. "How long before they're in weapons range?" "That's not our only problem." Jin brought up a holographic display showing the approaching Stellari fleet. "Look at their formation. They're not just here for arrests. That's an extinction protocol." Nova pressed closer to her mother as Lyra explained. "They're going to sterilize the entire station. Remove any trace of genetic contamination. Like hell they are." Jin's augmentations pulsed with anger. "I got 3,000 people living here. Families. Children. I won't let them become casualties of the Conclave's paranoia." "Then help us leave," Rhiannon said. "If we go now, it's too late for that. They've already locked down all approach vectors. No ship could get through their formation." Jin turned to Nova, her expression softening. "Unless you can do more than just see patterns, can't you, child?" Nova nodded slowly. "I see how things connect. The light between spaces, the psalms that bind everything together." She looked up at her mother. "I could show them, make them understand. like I showed Captain Vale. Absolutely not, Lyra said firmly. It's too dangerous. If the Executor realizes the full extent of your abilities, they're going to kill everyone here because of me. Nova interrupted, her voice carrying that crystalline clarity that made her sound far older than her years. Because they're afraid of what I represent. But fear comes from not understanding. Her patterns shifted, creating complex geometries in the air. Let me help them understand. Before anyone could respond, new alarms blared throughout the station. Jin checked her displays and swore softly. They're powering up their main weapons. We have maybe 10 minutes before they're in optimal range. Rhiannon looked at Nova, seeing not just a child but a bridge between worlds, a future that could either unite or destroy them. It's her choice, she said quietly. We've been running and hiding, trying to protect her. Maybe it's time to let her protect herself. Lyra's pattern showed conflict, fear warring with pride and hope. Finally, she knelt beside her daughter. Are you sure about this? Nova smiled, and in that moment, her light patterns seemed to encompass all the possibilities of what humanity and Stellari could become together. I've always been sure, Mom. I just needed everyone else to be ready. She stepped to the center of the room, and her bioluminescence began to change. The light didn't just flow around her now. It seemed to bend reality itself, creating pathways through dimensions that shouldn't exist. Through the station's viewports, they could see the approaching Stellari fleet, their weapons charging with deadly purpose. What are you going to do? Rhiannon asked softly. I'm going to show them what they've been afraid to see, Nova replied, her voice echoing with harmonies that touched something deep in every species present. The truth about evolution, about change, about the future we could build together. As Nova's power began to reach out across space, Rhiannon Vale watched in awe, knowing she was witnessing not just a confrontation, but the moment when everything would change. The question was whether that change would bring destruction or enlightenment, and the answer lay in the hands of a child who had dared to exist beyond the boundaries of what anyone thought possible, beyond the stars. The space between Sanctuary Station and the Conclave fleet erupted with light. Nova's power reached out across the void, transforming the darkness into a canvas of living energy. Every being on the station, whether human, Stellari, or other species, felt the touch of that light in their minds. Not an invasion, but an invitation to see. Through Nova's gift, they witnessed the dance of evolution itself. The intricate patterns of DNA spanning across species, the subtle harmonies of quantum mechanics that bound all life together, and the infinite possibilities that lay in the spaces between what was and what could be. On the bridge of the Judgment Carrier, Executor Theron watched the approaching light with a mixture of fear and fascination. His security forces raised weapons, though what good physical weapons would do against this display of power, none could say. Executor, his second-in-command whispered, we should begin the purification protocol. Wait. Theron's patterns shifted with uncertainty as the light reached their ship. I want to see what the abomination wants to show us. The light enveloped the Conclave fleet, and with it came understanding. Every Stellari aboard those ships experienced what Nova had known since birth, the fundamental truth that evolution wasn't a ladder to climb, but a web to explore, that change wasn't a corruption but a gift, and that the future belonged not to those who remained pure, but to those who dared to transform. In the conference room on Sanctuary, Rhiannon watched as Nova maintained the connection, her small form now a nexus of impossible energies. Lyra stood nearby, her patterns showing both terror and wonder at her daughter's true potential. She's not just showing them data, Director Jin said, her cybernetic augmentation struggling to process what they were sensing. She's showing them possibility itself. Through the station's viewports, they could see the Conclave ships powering down their weapons. The extinction protocol died quietly, replaced by something far more powerful, hope. Nova's voice echoed through every mind present, carried on waves of light that transcended normal communication. We don't have to be afraid of change, she said, her words translated perfectly for each species. Look at what we could become together. The light shifted, showing visions of a future where humanity's adaptability and the stellary's genetic mastery worked in harmony. Cities made of light and thought, ships that weren't built but grown, children who carried the best of both species and reached for even greater horizons. Executor Theron's voice came across the comm, changed from its previous cold authority. All this time, we thought we were protecting our species, but we were only limiting it. The Conclave's mandate was to preserve our genetic heritage, Lyra replied, her patterns showing cautious optimism. But preservation doesn't mean stagnation. Evolution has always been our heritage. And now we have proof, Rhiannon added, that evolution works best when different species work together, when we protect our differences instead of fearing them. The light began to fade as Nova reached her limits. She swayed, and Rhiannon caught her before she could fall. The child's eyes were tired but happy, her patterns showing satisfaction. Did they understand? She asked softly. Look, Rhiannon said, pointing to the Conclave ships. One by one, they were powering down their weapons completely. The Judgment Carrier's docking bay opened, and a single shuttle emerged. Executor Theron requests permission to board, Jin announced, her augmentation showing genuine surprise. He says he wants to talk about the future. Hours later, in a larger conference room, representatives from both species sat together. Nova slept peacefully in a corner, her light patterns creating gentle auroras as she dreamed. Lyra and Rhiannon sat side by side, watching as Theron and Jin drafted the first version of what would become known as the Evolution Accords. It won't be easy, Theron admitted, his patterns showing determination. Many in the Conclave will resist these changes, but they cannot unsee what we've witnessed today. We can no longer pretend that isolation and genetic purity are the path to our species' survival. Change never is easy, Rhiannon said, thinking of that moment 8 years ago, when she'd chosen to save Lyra despite the cost. But the hardest choices often lead to the most important transformations, and we'll face those choices together, Lyra added, her patterns matching Rhiannon's resolve, as we should have from the beginning. Director Jin smiled as she finalized the document. It's appropriate that this happened here, on Sanctuary. This station was built to protect those who dared to be different. Now it will be remembered as the place where difference became strength. As the various representatives began signing the accords, Rhiannon looked at the sleeping child who had changed everything. Nova's very existence had been a question that challenged both species' assumptions about what was possible. Her answer had been to show them that possibility itself was infinite, if only they were brave enough to embrace it. You know, Lyra said softly, following Rhiannon's gaze, 8 years ago, you told me staying alive would be payment enough for saving me. I hope this proves to be worth the wait. Rhiannon smiled, remembering the burned corridors of a dying ship, the choice that had cost her everything and given her something far more valuable in return. Some debts don't need to be repaid, she said. Sometimes just being part of the story is reward enough. Outside Sanctuary's windows, the stars seemed to shine brighter, as if reflecting the new possibilities that had opened up across the galaxy. Humanity and the Stellari had taken their first steps toward a shared future, guided by a child who embodied the best of both worlds and the courage of those who had chosen to protect her. It wasn't an ending, not really. It was a beginning. The start of an evolution that would reshape not just their species, but their understanding of what was possible when difference was seen not as a threat, but as the greatest gift the universe could offer.